The train's whistle split the dusk like a jagged knife, a thin, desperate sound swallowed by the empty Kansas plains. Dust rose in brittle clouds along the platform, clinging to the hollow-eyed children as they gathered in stiff clusters, their faces streaked with soot and sweat. Coats too thin for autumn wind, boots too loose, or bare feet raw against the splintered boards. None spoke. None dared. Eliza May stood among them, a slip of a girl no more than 10, hair tangled in thick, dark knots, cheeks smudged with grime. Her bare toes gripped the wood, a stained calico bundle clutched tight against her chest. Everything she owned bound up in a square of old cloth. A button, a kerchief, and a name scrawled on brittle paper. She pressed her lips together, the taste of iron in her mouth, and stared down at the earth packed hard between the rails. The matron called names in a voice sharp as frost. Her faded blue cloak snapped in the wind, the pages of a worn ledger fluttering as she ticked off one child after another. They stepped forward like cattle driven to market. A boy coughed and was cuffed hard enough to stagger. Eliza kept her breath small in her throat. The wind smelled of coal smoke and old sorrow. A woman broke from the waiting line of townsfolk, broad-shouldered, face blunt and square, hair drawn back so tight it bared the sharp points of her cheekbones. Her eyes, pale as weathered stone, scanned the line of children and stopped on Eliza. No words. A single gloved hand reached out, closing around the girl's shoulder with a pressure that bit down through calico and bone. The matron glanced up, scribbled a name in the book. A brittle nod passed between them. The train shuddered, wheels grinding. Eliza felt the grip on her shoulder tighten as the orphan train gave a shriek and pulled away, dragging a cloud of dust and old leaves behind it. She turned once, just once. Through the soot-streaked window, a boy's face, maybe 12, pale with sharp cheekbones and dark hair, flattened to his brow. He stared at her, his palm pressed against the glass. Neither moved. Neither waved. The distance grew with the clatter of wheels, but the look held, fixed like a nail driven deep. The memory of it would stay in the marrow of her bones. The woman jerked her away, down the broken steps toward a waiting wagon, where an old man sat hunched at the reins, face hidden beneath the brim of a battered hat. He did not look up as Eliza was shoved onto the seat beside a sack of feed. The wagon creaked and groaned as it lurched forward. They passed dry fields stretched wide beneath the colorless sky, fence posts leaning like crooked teeth, dead trees clawing toward nothing. No sound but the scrape of wagon wheels and the hollow clop of mule hooves. Dust coated the inside of Eliza's mouth, and she swallowed it like ashes. She clutched her bundle tighter. It smelled of smoke and old fabric, but it was hers. It was proof she belonged to someone once. The woman beside her stared straight ahead, the lines in her face deep as river cuts, and said nothing. The land dragged on, a gray smear of grass and barbed wire, until a slumped house rose out of the dusk. Crooked walls, shutters sagging. Smoke limped from a chimney, as if too weary to rise. Chickens scattered at the wagon's approach, and a mule lifted its head, ears flicking back. The old man climbed down without a glance. Mrs. Harrow. The matron had muttered her name once, before the ledger closed, took Eliza's arm and led her through the lean yard. Boards creaked underfoot. The air smelled of earth and rot. Inside the house, walls stained with soot. A stove sulked in the corner. A table with one unlit lamp. In a small room off the kitchen, a mattress lay on the floor, its ticking stained and lumpy with straw. The woman pointed. Eliza moved to the mattress, knelt, and laid her bundle down. The cloth opened with a sigh, revealing a yellowed kerchief, a single mother-of-pearl button, and the scrap of paper, its inked letters faded and trembling. Eliza May. She folded it again, hands careful, though they shook. She did not cry. She had done that enough on the train, when no one saw. Mrs. Harrow said nothing. Her shadow filled the doorway. Then a hand pointed again, this time toward the barn visible through the cracked glass of the kitchen window. Eliza hesitated. The sky bled out its last light, the fields fading into a smear of gray and black. She saw the barn's dark mouth, a hunched shape against the horizon, and felt the cold bite against her skin. The woman raised her hand, open-palmed. Eliza went. The yard stung her bare feet. Stalks of dry grass tugged at her ankles. She crossed the space between house and barn beneath a sky drained of color. An owl called once, high and sharp, and the wind gathered what little warmth there was and carried it far away. The barn loomed. Boards peeled back from rusted nails. The doors hung askew. A single lantern guttered inside, its glow weak and yellow against the gathering dark. Eliza stepped through, the air thick with the stink of old hay, manure, and the heavy breath of animals. Stalls lined the walls, shadows shifting inside them. The horse turned its head, a white stripe down its nose, eyes reflecting the flicker of lantern light. She stepped deeper, the straw brittle beneath her feet. The silence was a living thing, wrapping around her throat, pressing against her chest. In the corner, a pile of straw, rough and rank. A space cleared of muck. She dropped to her knees, straw sticking to her palms, and curled herself into the hollow. The barn door creaked shut behind her. Outside, the wind sighed through the fence posts, carrying the last cry of the owl away into the empty night. The barn swallowed her whole, heavy with the stink of old manure, sour hay, and the restless breathing of animals. It was a world apart from the bleak expanse outside. Shadows hung thick in the corners, clustered like forgotten things. Wooden stalls lined either side, crooked and splintering, holding a pair of dull-eyed mules, a thin-hipped horse with a white stripe down its nose, and a calf, so young its coat still shone in patches. The animals shifted at her presence, the faint clatter of hooves against worn boards breaking the oppressive hush. A single lantern hung from a rusted hook overhead. Its flame swayed with each draft that squeezed through the warped slats, sending the light lurching, doubling the shadows, deepening the gloom. The dim glow made the dark feel thicker, a thing alive, waiting just beyond reach. The barn doors yawned open once more, and Mrs. Harrow's figure appeared in the entrance, a broad, silent shape. In one hand, a dented pail sloshing with water and a stiff brush caked in old filth. Without a word, she tossed the pail to the packed earth floor. It struck with a splash, water dark with dirt. The brush followed. A gnarled hand pointed at the nearest stall, where muck lay in sodden heaps. No gloves, no shoes, not a word. Eliza moved. The earth bit into the soles of her feet, cold and wet. She knelt, the chill of the ground pressing against her bones, the rough straw scratching at her skin. The filth gave beneath her bare hands, thick and clinging, the scent turning her stomach, though she did not gag. The work came without thought. Her fingers scraped back layers of soiled straw and slick muck, piling it into the pail, then dragging fresh straw from the loft corner. The calf watched her with wide, soft eyes, its breath a mist in the frigid air. The mules grunted, ears twitching. The thin horse shuddered once but stayed silent. The hours stretched uncounted. Time shed its shape. There was only the scrape and drag of muck, the sting of splinters, the raw cold gnawing at her skin. Blood rose where sharp straw or hidden stones cut her palms. She kept her head down, the weight of Mrs. Harrow's gaze long gone but lingering in the air like a warning. The lantern swayed and guttered, the flame shrinking as drafts hunted it. Shadows slid like long, grasping hands along the walls. A mouse darted past, its tiny claws skittering against stone. Outside, the wind rattled loose boards, tugging at hinges and seams, but no help came on it. Her fingers cracked, nails rimmed with black. The muck clung, refusing to let go. Her calico dress, thin as paper, dragged through the filth. The hem stained dark, clinging to her legs, the cold sinking deeper. No tears came. Only a steady ache rooted itself in the hollow of her chest, dull and heavy. Once, the barn door opened again. Mrs. Harrow appeared without announcement, a ragged scrap of bread in one hand and a dented tin cup in the other. She tossed them onto a rag on the ground without slowing, the bread stale enough to knock hollow against the earth. No words, no look. Then she was gone. Eliza's fingers trembled as she lifted the bread. It crumbled in her hand, dry and tasteless. She chewed because she must, the stale crumbs sticking in her throat. The water tasted of rust and earth, but it was wet. She drank it in one swallow, wiping her mouth with the back of a filthy hand. A mule stamped its stall, the sound sharp and sudden in the thick quiet. The pail tipped, its contents sloshing out in a dark heap. Eliza scrambled to right it, her raw palms plunging into the mess, scraping it back into the pail. The stench clung to her skin. The horse snorted, shifting as if it could feel the rising dread in the air. The cold deepened. The wind hissed through the gaps in the boards, an unceasing voice, just beyond hearing. The lantern burned low, a wavering, weak thing. Each time it flickered, Eliza's pulse quickened, afraid of what would come with the dark. By the time midnight dragged itself across the fields outside, she could no longer feel her feet. The muck clung to her dress, her knees bruised and stiff. Her hands throbbed, the skin split and raw. The barn settled into a hush that spoke of long, empty nights and worse things. At last, she crawled into a corner, a space cleared of filth, and gathered a mound of straw around her bloodied feet. It did nothing against the cold. The animals shifted in their stalls, sleep-heavy, breath misting the air. Her eyes fixed on a single thing. A beam above one of the stalls, a thick, splintered nail driven deep. A frayed length of rope looped loosely around it, hanging idle. A thing meant for beasts. Or worse. The lantern gave one final flicker, and the barn swallowed the last of the light. A rooster's call split the brittle dawn, sharp and ragged as the light that struggled to rise over the gray, unyielding plains. Mist curled in the low places, clinging to fence posts and puddles of last night's rain, softening the outline of the battered house and the crooked barn beyond it. The field stretched dull and endless in every direction, a land without color, without sound but for that single call. Eliza woke stiffly, the cold clinging to her skin like a second, crueler coat. Her dress, stained and stiff with filth, stuck to her legs. Mud caked her bare feet, clinging between her toes, streaked with blood where the rough ground had split the skin. Her hands, curled beneath her, ached with a deep, grinding throb. Blisters risen the day before had torn, leaving raw, pink flesh beneath. The barn around her hung silent, save for the restless shift of the animals. A mule snorted softly. The calf gave a half-hearted bleat. Light seeped thinly through the warped boards, painting long stripes of pale gray across the packed earth floor. The rope hung from the nail still, a frayed loop, motionless in the morning hush. Eliza pushed herself upright, her joints stiff as old wood. A piece of straw clung to her hair. She brushed it away and crossed the yard on numb, splintered feet. The frost-bitten ground stung with every step, but she made no sound. By the pump, a bucket sat brimming with cold well water, a skin of ice around the edges. She knelt and thrust her hands in, scrubbing until the chill bit deep into the cracks and cuts. Dirt and blood lifted from her skin, swirling in the water like ink. The door to the house opened with a groan of old hinges. Mrs. Harrow appeared, a pail of table scraps in one hand. Her face showed no change at the sight of Eliza. She pointed toward the chicken coop with a flick of her wrist and turned away, without a word. Eliza obeyed. The earth was littered with sharp stones, each one a needle against her torn soles. Frost clung to the grass, melting into icy mud beneath her steps. The chickens clucked and scattered as she entered the coop, the sharp reek of feathers and droppings burning her throat. She gathered the eggs with trembling fingers, the shells cold against her skin. One cracked in her palm. She scooped it into the pail anyway. From the porch, Mr. Harrow watched. A shotgun rested across his lap, his hand slack but steady. His face was unreadable, a long, slack mask of weathered skin and gray stubble. He didn't speak, didn't nod, only watched. Inside the house, the fire snapped in the stove. The table was laid with plates of boiled meat and potatoes, thick slices of bread, a jug of milk. The Harrows ate in silence, metal forks scraping against tin plates. Eliza stood by the door, shivering in her filthy dress. No chair was offered. A scrap of crust was tossed toward her, landing on the edge of a ragged cloth on the floor. A faded calendar hung by the stove, the page curled and yellowed. October 1895 printed in heavy black ink. The date fixed itself in Eliza's mind. A marker, a stone she would carry. The day bled out in labor. hauling water from the well in a dented bucket too heavy for her thin arms. Mucking the stalls again, her hands raw, the chill making her bones ache. Gathering stones from the fields where frost still clung to the earth, each rock biting into her palms. No shoes, no gloves. The blisters on her feet burst. Blood marked her path. Dark dots in the dirt, but she made no sound. Pain had settled into something familiar. Late afternoon brought no kindness. Only a wind rising, dry and sharp, dragging dust across the yard. A mule shuddered in its pen. Chickens huddled in the shadows of the coop. The clouds hung low, pressing the sky to the earth. At the fence line, a figure appeared. A girl about Eliza's age, maybe a year older. Hair yellow as field flowers in summer, tied back with a clean blue ribbon. Her dress was neat, her face round and clean, cheeks pink from the cold. She stood by the fence, a basket hanging from one arm, her eyes fixed on Eliza. Eliza straightened from where she crouched, fingers scraped raw, a stone clutched in one palm. The girls stared at one another, neither speaking, the distance between them wide as the plains. The neighbor girl's eyes darted to Eliza's bare feet, the muck-stained hem of her dress, the weeping blisters. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came. She turned and walked away. The sun never truly set so much as drained away, leaving the land the color of old bone. Nightfall came heavy and absolute. The barn again. The pail. The muck. The lantern hung low, its flame small and weak, a single circle of light in the suffocating dark. A moth battered itself against the glass, its wings catching the flicker. The animals shifted, uneasy, as if the dark spoke a language they understood. Eliza worked without thought, her hands moving by instinct. The stench clung to her skin, to her hair. Every cut throbbed with the cold, her fingers swollen and cracked. At some point she hummed, a sound so soft it barely existed, a thread of melody from a place long lost. A lullaby. She could not recall the words, but the tune lingered in some deep, hidden place. A mother's voice, perhaps, or her own invention. She hummed to keep the dark at bay. The rope hung still, looped around its nail. A single strand of fray had come loose, swinging slightly in the draft. When the work was done, when the cold had claimed what little strength remained, she made a nest of straw beneath the manger, where the mule's breath stirred the air in slow, heavy gusts. She curled into herself, her arms around her knees, the ache in her limbs deep as bone. Sleep came in ragged fits, and with it, the boy's face, pale behind the train window, dark hair flattened by the glass, eyes locked to hers across distance and dust. His palm pressed flat against the glass, the unspoken promise in his gaze. Neither forgotten. The third dawn came thick with fog, a damp weight that pressed low to the earth, swallowing fence posts and turning the trees in the distance into shadowy ghosts. The gray smothered the land, dulled the barn's crooked lines, and muted the restless shifting of the animals inside. The light was slow in coming, seeping like cold breath through the cracks in the boards. Eliza stirred beneath her straw nest, her body a patchwork of bruises, her hands split and raw. The ache in her limbs had settled into something constant, a dull thrum in the marrow of her bones. She blinked at the dim shape of the lantern overhead, long since burned cold. The rope on the nail hung limp, gathering damp from the mist. The barn door stood ajar, a crack of open air where it should have been closed and barred. A mistake, or perhaps carelessness born of certainty. No one expected the barefoot girl with blisters and torn skin to do more than crawl. For a long moment, she watched that thin slice of pale fog curling at the door's edge, felt the cool air stroke her face. The sound of the house was absent, no clatter of pans, no snap of firewood. The world outside held its breath. Eliza rose, every joint stiff, pain blooming in each scraped knuckle. She pressed a hand to the pail, overturned and empty. The animals stirred but made no sound. She crossed the barn's threshold. The cold slapped her bare skin, her dress still clinging with muck from the night before. Blood stuck to the soles of her feet, leaving small, dark stains in the frost-hardened earth as she moved. The wind pushed at the mist in lazy swirls. The yard stretched before her, empty. No Mrs. Harrow. No shotgun cradled in Mr. Harrow's lap. The house hunched in the fog, its windows black and unseeing. Eliza didn't run yet. She walked, each step careful, each breath shallow. Past the shed where rusted tools hung in crooked rows. Past the trough where yesterday's water had turned to ice. Every nerve stretched tight, waiting for the slam of a door, the bark of a command. None came. At the fence line, she stopped. Gray grass sprawled beyond, heavy with dew, leading to a ragged edge of trees half hidden in the mist. The woods were far, too far for a child with torn feet and raw hands. But she'd already left the barn. The space between this side of the fence and the world beyond might as well have been eternity. A decision settled in her then, not in words, but in the marrow of her bones. A certainty older than thought. She ran, each step a lance of pain, the frozen ground cutting deep, mud sucking at her heels. The calico bundle hugged to her chest, its damp fabric a weight against her ribs. Blood burst from half-healed blisters. She left a trail of crimson dots in her wake, vanishing into mist. A dog's bark tore the silence. Somewhere behind her, the house, or the road, or the shadow of the fence. A sharp crack followed. A gunshot, splitting the fog, chasing the air from her lungs. Eliza's legs burned. The trees drew closer, their edges wavering like smoke. Branches rose out of the mist, skeletal fingers reaching down. She stumbled once, catching herself on torn palms, breath tearing in ragged pulls. She reached the trees. Leaves hung low, dripping. The mist swallowed the farm behind her, closing in thick. The world muffled, the cries and barks lost to the wet hush of the woods. She dropped to the ground, rolling beneath a fallen log, its belly hollowed by rot. The earth there was damp, the scent of old leaves and decay thick. She pressed her filthy hands over her mouth, chest heaving. The sound of feet came soon after, heavy, halting. The snap of twigs. Mrs. Harrow's voice, thin and sharp as wire, calling through the mist. "Little thief girl, you come out now." Another voice, the old man's, gruff and slow. The words blurred by distance, but the tone was clear. Eliza lay still, heart hammering so hard it hurt. A single droplet of water fell from a leaf, striking her cheek. She did not flinch. The footsteps passed, faded. The voices trailed off, swallowed by the fog and the pressing trees. Silence returned. She waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. She did not move, not even when her muscles cramped. The mist thinned only slightly, pale light creeping through the branches overhead. When no sound came but the scrape of leaves in the wind, Eliza let her eyes close. Sleep came brittle and broken, carrying with it the boy's face. The window pane between them, his palm against the glass, the hollow look in his eyes. A promise made without words, the weight of it clinging to her like a second skin. When she woke, the light had shifted. The fog remained in low patches, but the world around her had lifted into a gray morning. The ache in her body spoke of every hour she'd passed on that farm, every blow of cold, every handful of muck. She was hungry, the sharp, hollow ache gnawing deep, her hands and feet crusted with blood and dirt. A sound came, the slow, rattling creak of wheels over rutted ground. Eliza crawled from beneath the log, her body stiff, hair matted to her cheek. Along the road a few yards off, a peddler's cart rattled by, the old mule pulling it head down, steam rising from its flanks. The cart sagged under the weight of sacks and tins, its owner a man of maybe 50, face lined, beard gone to gray. She stood, her legs nearly buckled, but she crossed the clearing on raw feet, emerging onto the road. The man slowed his mule, frowning at the sight of her, a small, filthy girl with hollowed cheeks, eyes too old for her face. She clutched the calico bundle, its faded cloth smeared with grime. A long moment passed. Their eyes met. In his, something flickered. Recognition, perhaps, or the memory of a daughter lost to fever years ago. He saw the blood at her heels, the dirt on her skin, the cold behind her stare. He said nothing, just reached down, lifted her onto the cart beside a sack of grain, and wrapped a frayed wool blanket around her shoulders. The cart rolled on. The Harrow farm vanished behind them, lost in mist and distance. The road stretched ahead, gray and rutted, the world empty but for the steady clop of hooves and the distant cry of a bird overhead. Eliza clutched the bundle to her chest. Inside, the paper scrap with Eliza May inked in a mother's unsteady hand remained, a brittle, stained thing. The only proof she was ever anyone. Somewhere ahead, there might be a town, a church, a name spoken in kindness. Or perhaps not. But for now, there was only the road and the sound of the cartwheels turning, carrying her away from what would never find her again.